The morning began like any other, with the sound of cattle lowing and the faint smell of dew settling into the dirt of my four-generation farm. But there are days you remember forever. Not because you wanted to, but because trouble made certain you would never forget. That Tuesday was one of those days. My name is Holt Travis, and I don't go looking for fights. Life has taught me that if you work hard, keep fair with folks, and mind your land, you'll get along just fine. But when trouble stares you in the face, or in my case parks in your driveway, well, I've never been the type to look the other way. By the time Lisa, my wife, called me from the porch, I already heard the sharp crunch of tires out front. She didn't raise her voice, only said my name in that tight, thin way she gets when a storm's about to land. Holt, you need to see this. I wiped my hands on a rag, clumps of grease from the tractor staining the cloth, and stepped out onto the porch. The sun was half up, lighting everything in bright gold, and there in the middle of it sat the ugliest sight a farmer could ask for. A shining, white luxury SUV, angled across my gravel like a scar on clean ground. That rig didn't belong here. It hadn't known mud a day in its life. It gleamed like a showpiece, sitting arrogant as a dentist's smile, blocking me from leaving my own property. Even from the porch, I could see a note tucked under the windshield wiper. I walked down, work boots sinking into fresh gravel, and tugged it free. My fingers brushed against fancy paper, the expensive, perfumed kind nobody in the country uses to write real words on. The script was sharp, smug, and signed in a name I knew too well. Karen Tyson, HOA President. We need to discuss the new community access point. I'll be back at noon. Don't go anywhere. I read it twice, then a third time, just to let her words sink like cold stones in my stomach. Community access point. A pretty phrase meant to slice straight through the heart of my land. What she wanted was a shortcut carved into my pasture, a trail for her subdivision at the cost of my best grazing ground. We'd been receiving their letters, half polite, half threats, for months. We ignored them because this land wasn't theirs. It belonged to my family, forged by hands harder than paper. But Karen's SUV blocking my driveway wasn't a letter. It was a dare. Lisa stayed on the porch, coffee mug resting easy in her hand, though her eyes said she knew exactly what I was about to do. The camera on the birdhouse is rolling, right? I asked. She sipped slow, lips curling faint. Of course, she said. She knew me too well. I yelled from my drive, hoping she hid inside those curtains. Move your car, Karen! Ed, my neighbor, poked his head from his porch a few properties down, mug raised in salute. Morning show's starting early, he hollered. Another fellow, Mark, drifted toward the fence line, calm as a scarecrow, muttering through a grin. You gonna tow or plow? Neither, I said. My boots turned back toward the barn. I'm just taking out the trash. Politely. The old John Deere waited for me. 4 generations of history and 10 tons worth of patience. I climbed up, turned the ignition, and the beast roared awake, deep and throaty, the kind of sound that shakes dirt loose from rafters. Windows rattled. Birds scattered. Neighbors gathered. Lisa only whispered, "It's rolling, Holt. So are you." I idled across the yard, tractor lumbering up to Karen's pristine SUV. The forks lowered on the front loader, hydraulics humming. I've lifted hay bales heavier than this machine. Pulled oak stumps clear out of the earth. A 2-ton luxury car was nothing but a calf in the arms of this giant. Still, I was deliberate. Forks slid beneath the frame, kissed metal gently. Careful. I wasn't out to scratch it. Not yet. Judging fingers from neighbors raised in signal. Half an inch. Slow. I eased the lever. The SUV groaned, tilted, then lifted smooth. Its nose pitched up like a begging dog, ridiculous in its helpless posture. The street fell silent as blinds snapped open in houses all around. More than one neighbor muttered bets under their breath. Lisa's calm voice cut clear from the porch. Steady, Holt. Steady's all I've got, I called back. I crept forward, the huge wheels carving ruts. The ditch loomed ahead, tall grass waving over 5 feet of mud and cattails. One tap on the hydraulic lever lowered Karen's shiny chariot. Its tires whispered against the grass, then groaned into the bank with a wet, embarrassed thump. I gave it a little nudge for good measure, just a farm-friendly flip, and the SUV slid nose first into muck, back end sticking up like a hog sniffing for acorns. The silence that followed was sweeter than music. I backed the John Deere into the barn and shut her down. When I walked back across the yard, sunshine on my shoulders, life felt lighter than it had all week. Lisa met me on the porch, still holding her coffee, grin flashing across her face. Neighbor Ed drove by, she said, backed up and near choked on his laughter. Dashboard cam caught the whole thing. She held up her phone. Birdhouse cam too. Crystal clear. I flattened Karen's note against the railing and read her arrogance out loud. Don't go anywhere. I glanced back to the ditch, where her polished SUV sat like a stranded whale. Problem solved, or so I believed. But trouble, I know, doesn't end easy. By sundown, the video was already circling the internet. Ed's son had titled it Farmer vs. HOA President, and it spread like wildfire. Strangers I'd never met cheered me on, calling my tractor a precision justice system, and praising me for not leaving a scratch as I tipped her rig into the mud. Lisa read the comments aloud at dinner, laughing until tears sat at her cheeks. For one night, it felt like victory. But I've lived long enough to know. Bullies don't retreat when they're embarrassed. They recover, they plot, they dig in quiet, building the next strike with sharper teeth. The cheering online faded in hours, but the enemy still lived just down the street. And sure enough, 2 days later, the first letter arrived. A thick envelope, cream-colored, sealed like something from a law office. Even the paper smelled rich, laced faintly with perfume. Certified delivery straight from Briarwood Estates HOA, signed in Karen Tyson's proud hand. Lisa slid it open with a calm motion, scanning past legal fluff until her eyes narrowed. Well, she said flatly, here we go. The fines listed inside were laughable if they hadn't been printed in such smug detail. $500 for unauthorized operation of agricultural machinery on a residential access road. My driveway, paved in sweat by my great-grandfather, rebranded. $1,000 for unapproved alteration to community landscape. That meant the ruts her own SUV had carved sliding into the ditch. And the worst punch of all? $2,000 for public nuisance and safety hazard, citing the viral video clip as evidence of my aggressive, unpredictable behavior. I stood there staring, incredulous. It read like a ticket written by the wolf after breaking his teeth on my sheep. She can't be serious, I muttered. But Lisa was already rushing through the HOA bylaws with fast, practiced fingers. She's the strategist. I'm the hammer. It's how we've always worked. She doesn't bluff. She doesn't jest. Oh, she's serious, Holt, Lisa said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The bylaws are written so vaguely, she can interpret them almost any way she wants. Look at this section. The Architectural Control Committee reserves the right to levy fines for any action deemed detrimental to the aesthetic harmony of the community. That's a blank check for her to do whatever she wants. The aesthetic harmony of the community. My farm, which was here decades before Briarwood Estates was even a name on a developer's blueprint, was now a threat to their harmony. The next day, another letter arrived. This one wasn't a fine, it was a formal demand. That afternoon, she strutted down my gravel like she owned the stones. Sign the survey permission, Hall, she said, voice sweet with rot. Or the county will sign it for you. I held the letter between 2 fingers. You practicing law without a license now. She smiled thin. I practice winning. People like you fold, she said. I just picked the crease. Lisa stepped onto the porch, phone up. Karen tilted her head at the camera. Film this, she said. This is the day he learned who runs Briarwood. The cows, I said, they run Briarwood. Her smile cracked under her breath. You'll wish you'd sold cheap. Lisa's camera caught it. It stated that due to my demonstrated hostility and the clear need for secondary access for emergency services, the HOA would petition the county to survey my land and seek a utility assessment, tossing around words like public good and hinting at eminent domain if I fought. The county would have to decide that. Not Karen, not the HOA, but the message was simple. We're going to take your land whether you like it or not. This was her endgame. The block driveway, the fines, it was all a pretext. A way to manufacture a justification for the easement she wanted all along. She was building a paper trail to make it look like I was an unreasonable problem that needed to be solved. And the solution just happened to be a road through my pasture that would make her and her developer friends a pile of money. The emails started that night. They came from Karen's official HOA email address. The first one was condescending. Mr. Travis, I'm willing to be the bigger person here. If you agree to a meeting to discuss the easement, I might be willing to reconsider these unfortunate but necessary fines. I didn't reply. An hour later, another one came. Your lack of response is being noted. A cooperative attitude would be in your best interest. Then they got nasty. She accused me of lowering property values. She threatened legal action that would tie up your farm in court for years. She even attached a blurry photo of my barn. Subject line. That's a lovely old barn. It would be a shame if it failed a fire code inspection. She CC'd her insurer and hinted her damaged vehicle would need a full replacement. It was a threat, plain and simple. Lisa printed every single email and placed them in a growing file folder she labeled Karen. I'm a patient man. I can wait for a seed to grow. I can wait for a storm to pass. My patience is deep, but it's not endless. Karen Tyson was methodically, relentlessly pushing me. She wasn't just trying to take a piece of my land anymore. She was trying to break me, to bury me in paperwork and threats until I gave up. I stood on my porch that night, looking out at the dark fields my family had poured their sweat and blood into. The land was quiet, peaceful, but a war had been declared on it, on us. The fines, the legal threats, the intimidation. It was all just the opening salvo. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that she wasn't going to stop with letters and emails. Her kind of poison always spreads. The paper cuts were just the beginning. The real pain was yet to come. The first real attack came without warning under the cover of a moonless night. I woke up around 3 a.m. in the morning with a feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was a stillness. The familiar low hum of the big diesel tank's transfer pump, which was set to top off the main tractor, was silent. It should have been running. I pulled on my boots and a jacket and grabbed the heavy maggot from by the door. The air outside was cold and heavy with dew. As I rounded the corner of the barn, the beam of my flashlight caught it. The hose from the main storage tank was lying on the ground, a dark, wet stain spreading in the dirt around it. The padlock on the tank valve was gone, snapped off with bolt cutters. I checked the gauge. The tank, which held 500 gallons of diesel fuel, was nearly empty. They hadn't just taken a little. They had drained it. A cold fury, different from the hot anger I'd felt over the SUV, washed over me. This was more than an inconvenience. This was a direct assault on my livelihood. That fuel was thousands of dollars. But more than that, it was the lifeblood of the farm. Without it, the tractor didn't run, the fields didn't get plowed, and the work didn't get done. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. This was sabotage. I swept the flashlight beam across the ground, looking for anything, and I found it. Next to the dark puddle of spilled fuel was a single clear boot print in the soft mud. It was a work boot, a cheap brand with a distinctive star pattern on the heel. It wasn't my size. I took a picture of it with my phone, evidence. Lisa was already up when I got back to the house, a worried look on her face. I didn't have to say a word. She saw the grim set of my jaw. I showed her the picture. They drained the main tank, I said. Her hand went to her mouth. Hull, we have to call the sheriff. I shook my head. And say what? That someone stole my fuel? They'll take a report and we'll never hear from them again. There's no proof it was her. The next morning, the full extent of the damage became clear. As I went to let the cattle out into the back 40 pasture, I found the gate. It wasn't open. It was cut. 3 clean cuts through the heavy gauge wire fence right next to the gate post. The gate itself was hanging by one hinge, and the cattle were gone. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, hit me. My herd wasn't huge, but they were my responsibility. And now they were scattered, wandering somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, potentially on the main road. The next 2 hours were a frantic blur. I called neighbor Ed, his wife Sharon, and a couple of other folks I could count on. It was a small community of farmers on the edge of the fancy subdivision, and we looked out for each other. We spread out in our trucks, driving the local roads, flashlights sweeping the fields. We found them, thankfully. A few were grazing peacefully in a neighbor's alfalfa field. A half-ozen had wandered down toward the highway, and we managed to turn them back just as the morning traffic was starting to pick up. It was a nightmare. Getting them all rounded up and herded back through the mangled gate took the entire morning. By the time the last cow was back in the pasture and I'd patched the fence with spare wire, the sun was high in the sky. I was exhausted, muddy, and running on pure adrenaline and rage. This was a calculated act of cruelty. They could have just left the gate open. Cutting the fence was meant to cause maximum damage, to endanger my animals, to create chaos. It was Karen's message loud and clear. I can touch you. I can hurt you. I can destroy what you care about. I stood there looking at the patched fence, the tired cattle, the empty fuel tank, the fines I could fight, the emails I could ignore. But this was different. This was a line. You don't mess with a man's family, and you don't mess with his animals. They had crossed that line. Back at the house, Lisa had been busy. She'd documented everything. Photos of the broken lock, the cut fence, the boot print. She'd estimated the cost of the stolen fuel and the time lost. She was building a case brick by brick. She's trying to create a pattern, Lisa said, her voice steely. She wants it to look like you're a negligent farmer, that your property is a hazard. First, the dangerous tractor, now loose cattle. It all feeds her narrative for the easement. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the anger draining out of me, leaving behind a hard, cold resolve. I had been reacting. The tractor in the ditch was a reaction. Now that was over. The time for reacting was done. It was time to start planning. It was time to set a trap. She wants a war, Lisa, I said, my voice low. Fine, she's got one, but we're going to fight it on our terms, on our turf. My mind was already turning, thinking about cameras and traps and the kind of quiet, patient warfare that a farmer knows best. She'd woken the sleeping dog. Now she was going to have to deal with the bite. The kitchen table became our war room. Lisa spread out a satellite map of our property, the kind you get from the county assessor's office. We had 160 acres, a perfect square. Our house and barns were near the road, but the land stretched back a long way. It was too much to patrol, too much to watch all at once. We can't be everywhere, I said, tracing the property line with my finger. So, we have to be smart. We have to make them come to us, to a place we control. Lisa nodded, tapping a pen on the map. The fuel tanks, the main gate. Those are the two places they've hit. They're predictable. They'll come back to do more of the same, to reinforce the pattern. She was right. Bullies are rarely creative. They stick to what works. My job was to make sure that this time what worked for them would work for me. The next day, I drove into town, but I didn't go to the feed store. I went to specialty electronics shop and a hunting supply store. My shopping list was unusual for a farmer. 4 high-defin game cameras, the kind that are motion-activated and have night vision. 2 tiny GPS trackers small enough to hide on a tractor. And the centerpiece of my plan, a special invisible ultraviolet dye meant for detecting leaks in machinery. It was harmless, but under a black light, it glowed a brilliant, unmistakable blue. It was used to find thieves. I also bought 3 pre-built birdhouses. They looked ordinary, rustic, the kind you'd see on any farm. But I spent that afternoon in my workshop carefully modifying them. I drilled a tiny hole in the front of each one just below the main opening, and mounted a small wireless camera inside. They had their own battery packs and would stream video directly to an app on Lisa's phone. They were my secret eyes. I spent the next 2 days setting my traps. It was hard work, but it was satisfying. It felt good to be doing something, to be taking control. I placed one birdhouse camera on a pole overlooking the main driveway and the front gate. Another went on the side of the barn with a perfect view of the fuel tanks. The last one I put on an old oak tree at the edge of the back pasture, aimed at the section of fence they had cut. The game cameras I placed in less obvious spots, hidden in bushes, covering the other approaches to the barn. Then came the GPS trackers. I tucked one deep into the engine compartment of my main tractor, and the other underneath the frame of my flatbed trailer. If they tried to steal my equipment, I'd know exactly where it went. The final piece of the trap was the dye. I didn't put it in the main diesel tank that was still mostly empty. Instead, I used the smaller 55-gallon drum we used for the utility gator. I filled it with fresh diesel, and then I added the entire bottle of UV dye. I mixed it in thoroughly. Then I left the cap slightly loose and put a brand new cheap padlock on the valve, one that could be snapped with a small pair of bolt cutters. It was bait. A nice full tank of fuel, seemingly less protected than the main one. It was an invitation. I felt a twinge of something, a nagging question in the back of my mind. How far is too far? I was actively luring someone into a trap. But then, I thought of my cattle wandering on a dark highway and the twinge disappeared. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting my home. With everything in place, all we could do was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Every night we'd sit in the living room, the TV on low, but our real attention was on Lisa's tablet, which showed the live feeds from the 4 cameras. Every shadow that moved, every rustle of leaves in the wind, made my heart jump. The first night, nothing. The second night, A deer wandered past the barn, triggering the motion sensor and giving us a minor heart attack. The third night, it rained. A slow, steady drizzle that turned the whole world gray and quiet. It felt like nothing would ever happen. I was starting to think I'd overplayed my hand, that they had done their damage and moved on. Maybe the sabotage was a one-time thing. Lisa, ever the patient one, put a hand on my arm. They'll be back. Hall people like Karen don't give up that easily. She's just waiting for you to lower your guard. As usual, she was right. It was just after midnight on the fourth night when the little notification icon popped up on her tablet. A chime soft but sharpened the quiet house. It was from the camera on the barn, the one pointed at the fuel tanks. We both leaned in, our breath held tight. The night vision view was grainy, black and white, but the image was clear. A lone figure, dressed in dark clothes and a hoodie, was moving stealthily toward the smaller fuel drum. He was carrying a pair of bolt cutters and a long coiled siphon hose. He paused, looked around, and then went to work on the cheap padlock. It snapped with a dull click. The rat had found the cheese. Now, we just had to see if he was dumb enough to eat it. I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. This had to be handled my way. I grabbed the big 6-mag light, the one that feels like a police baton, and a small, powerful UV flashlight I bought with the dye. I slipped out the back door, moving silently through the wet grass. The drizzle had stopped, but the air was thick and heavy. I didn't turn on my lights. I knew the lay of my land by heart. I circled around the back of the barn, coming up behind him. He was completely focused on his task. Thesiphon hose already. In the drum, the other end feeding into a row of plastic gas cans in the back of a beat-up dark cold pickup truck I didn't recognize. The sound of the gurgling diesel fuel was the only noise in the night. I was about 10 feet away when he finished filling the last can. He pulled the hose out of the drum, and a little bit of fuel sloshed out, splashing onto his hands and the cuffs of his jacket. He didn't seem to notice. He started screwing the caps back on the cans, getting ready to leave. That's when I made my move. I stepped out from behind the barn and hit him with the main beam of the mag light. The sudden intense blast of light made him cry out and throw his hands up to shield his eyes. "Looking for something?" I asked, my voice low and calm. He was just a man, not a monster. He looked to be in his 40s, thin and wiry, with a nervous energy about him. He was wearing cheap work boots. I'd bet my farm the heel had a star pattern on it. I wasn't doing anything, he stammered, blinking in the bright light. "I'm just leaving." "You're leaving with about 30 gall of my fuel," I said, taking another step closer. He darted left, boots skidding in the slick. I cut him off. "Keys," I said. "Truck keys." "Now." He tried to shoulder past me. I planted and he bounced. "You can't prove Jerry," I said, reading the name stitched on his jacket pocket. "I don't need to prove you're bad at this. I just need to prove who sent you." His eyes flicked toward the road like a dog glancing at a master who wasn't there. That told me more than any speech. "That's my diesel, not a buffet." He started to back away, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape route. "You can't prove nothing," he spat, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked. That's when I switched flashlights. I turned off the big mag light, plunging us back into near darkness for a second, and then I clicked on the small UV light. I pointed the beam at his hands. They lit up as if they were on fire. A brilliant, ghostly electric blue. The splashes on his jacket cuffs glowed. The tip of the siphon hose glowed. The puddle on the ground glowed. He looked down at his own hands, his mouth falling open in disbelief. He was caught, literally blue-handed. I call it Smurf justice. For a second, he froze. Then panic took over. He spun around and tried to run, but he was panicked and the ground was slick with mud and spilled diesel. He slipped, scrambled to his feet, and I was on him. I'm not a young man, but I'm strong. Years of farm work have made sure of that. I didn't hit him. I just grabbed him by the front of his jacket, spun him around and pinned him against the side of the barn. He struggled for armament, then went limp, breathing hard. The fight was gone. He was just a scared man who'd been caught doing something stupid. "It wasn't my idea," he gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "I swear it wasn't my idea. She paid me to do it. She made me do it." He was talking fast, the words tumbling out. He was ready to sell out whoever sent him for the slightest chance of getting out of this. I had him. I had my proof. But his desperate confession was more than just an admission of guilt. It was the key. It was the first thread I could pull that I knew would lead all the way back to Karen Tyson and unravel her entire scheme. I didn't let him go. I walked him into the barn, sat him down on an old wooden crate, and stood in front of him, my arms crossed. The big barn doors were closed. It was just the two of us, surrounded by the smell of hay and old wood. The man who told me his name was Jerry wouldn't look me in the eye. He just stared at his glowing blue hands. Lisa came in a moment later. She didn't say a word to him. She just set a small digital voice recorder on a nearby workbench and pressed the record button. A tiny red light blinked on. Jerry's eyes flicked toward it, and he seemed to shrink even smaller. "Let's start from the beginning, Jerry," I said, my voice even. "Who is she?" He hesitated for a second. Then it all came pouring out. He was a local handyman struggling to make ends meet. Karen Tyson had hired him a few weeks ago for some work at her house. Then she'd offered him cash for another job, an off-the-books job. Had admitted to everything. He told us how Karen had given him a pair of bolt cutters and paid him $500 to drain my fuel tank the first time. He said she was the one who told him to cut the fence to make it look like my cattle got out on their own. She wanted to create a record of problems to build a case against me with the county. She said you were a stubborn old man who was blocking progress. Jerry mumbled. She said, "If we made life hard enough for you, you'd sell the easement for cheap just to make it all stop." He described her plan in detail. She wanted the access road for a new luxury housing development. The developer was a company called HOA Estates, and they were paying her a hefty consulting fee to secure the right-of-way. The HOA was just her weapon, the fines and violations, her ammunition. Lisa listened intently, taking notes. When he was done talking, she spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and clear. "Jerry, you're in a lot of trouble. Grand theft, felony vandalism, trespassing. You could go to jail for this." Jerry flinched, but Lisa continued. "We're not unreasonable people. We don't want to ruin your life. We want the person who put you up to this." She slid a piece of paper and a pen across the workbench. "I've written out a statement with everything you just told us. I want you to read it, and if it's true, I want you to sign it. You do that, and we'll tell the sheriff you cooperated fully. You don't. And I'm calling him right now and sending him the video of you stealing my husband's fuel." It was a simple choice. Take the fall alone or take Karen down with him. I took his keys, rolled his beat-up truck into the equipment bay, and chained the bay door. "Evidence," I said. He left on foot. After Jerry left, walking quickly down the dark road with a warning to never come near my property again, Lisa and I went back to the house. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a sense of grim purpose. We had the confession. We had the video. But we knew it wasn't enough. A signed statement from a caught thief against a respected community leader like Karen Tyson. It would be his word against hers, and she would tear him apart in court. "We need more," Lisa said, already back at her computer. "We need a paper trail. We need to connect Karen directly to this developer, Oak Ridge Estates." And so the hunt began. Lisa, with her methodical brilliance, started digging. She spent hours online searching county records, business filings, and property deeds. I made coffee and looked over her shoulder, amazed at how she could navigate the maze of digital bureaucracy. The first crack appeared around 2 a.m. Lisa was cross-referencing the HOA's publicly posted meeting minutes with her own records. "That's funny," she murmured. "The HOA website says they held a special board meeting 3 weeks ago. The minutes show they voted to authorize legal action to secure an easement on our property." I remembered that night clearly. There was no meeting. I said, "Neighbor Ed is on the board." He would have told us Lisa's fingers flew across the keyboard. Exactly. Ed said the last meeting was 2 months ago. She pulled up the document. The minutes were detailed, formal, and completely fake. Karen had falsified official records to give herself the authority to sue us. The real breakthrough, the piece that tied it all together, came just before dawn. Lisa had been digging into the shell company, Oak Ridge Estates. It was registered in another state, designed to be anonymous. But she found one loose thread. A filing document for the company listed a registered agent, the person legally responsible for receiving paperwork. The name on the form was not Karen Tyson. It was a name I didn't recognize. Karen Miller. Miller? I asked, rubbing my tired eyes. Lisa looked at me, a grim smile on her face. I wondered about that too, she said. She opened a new browser tab and typed Karen Tyson genealogy into the search bar. A few clicks later, she found it. A wedding announcement from a local newspaper 20 years ago. The bride's name was Karen Miller. It was her maiden name. She had used her maiden name to register the shell company that was paying her to force an easement through our land. She was the developer. The whole thing was a self-serving criminal enterprise. We had her. We had the confession, the videos, the fake minutes, and now the money trail. The trap had been sprung, and the queen rat had left her name all over the cheese. We thought we had a few days to plan our next move, to take our evidence to the sheriff. We were wrong. Karen must have realized her handyman Jerry had gone silent. She must have suspected he'd been caught. Because her next move wasn't petty, it was desperate. The storm hit the following night. A real Midwestern monster rolled in with biblical fury. Wind howled, windows rattled, rain fell in sheets. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. Lisa lit a few oil lamps, their soft glow casting long dancing shadows on the walls. It was in the middle of a deafening clap of thunder that Lisa's phone, which she'd been keeping charged with a battery pack, chimed. It was another motion alert. This one was from the camera on the oak tree overlooking the far end of the property. We huddled around the small screen. The night vision was struggling against the sheeting rain, but the image was undeniable. A beat-up dark-colored pickup truck, the same one Jerry had used, was at our main gate. But this time, 2 men got out. They weren't trying to be quiet. One of them had a heavy chain and was wrapping it around the gate. The other was getting back in the truck. They were going to ram it or pull it right off its hinges. These weren't vandals sent to cause a nuisance. This was a brute force assault. They're here to yank Jerry's truck and smash the cameras. Destroy the evidence before we can hand it over. They're here to get it out of the barn before we can give it to the cops. Lisa was already dialing 911. The lines are down, she said, her voice strained. The storm must have knocked out the tower. We were on our own. A cold dread mixed with white-hot anger filled my chest. This was my home. My family was here. I would not let them break in. Stay here. Lock the doors. If they get past me, hit the panic horn and stay in the pantry, I told Lisa. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight and Mikey's and went out the back door into the roaring storm. The rain was so heavy it was like walking through a waterfall. I wasn't going for my pickup. I was going for the one thing on this farm bigger and tougher than their truck. I was going for Old Green. The tractor started with a reassuring roar, its engine a beastly growl against the thunder. Its headlights cut through the darkness and the rain. 2 powerful beams of light. I didn't bother with the front gate. I knew my own land. I drove straight through the side fence, the wires screaming and snapping as the massive machine plowed through without even slowing down. I rumbled out onto the main driveway just as they got the gate open. Lightning ripped the sky open. For a split second, I saw their faces wide, mean, scared. The chain snapped off the hinge and whipped the hood of their truck. They floored it. I swung left and the rear tire slid if they double back. I yelled toward the house. No answer. Lines were dead. Wind was a scream. From the porch, Lisa flashed the handheld light twice. I see you. I'm here. The truck fishtailed at the equipment shed and clipped my harrow, sparks skittering like fireflies. I dropped the bucket and herded them off the hard pack toward the pond, inch by wet inch. They saw me then. The tractor. A massive, roaring monster coming out of the darkness and the storm. Its lights blinding them. They panicked. The driver slammed their truck into reverse, tires spinning in the mud, and the man on foot scrambled to get back in. They weren't here for a fight with a 12-ton machine. They tried to turn around in the narrow space between the barn and the equipment shed, but the ground was a sea of mud. Their tires found no purchase. I just kept coming slow and steady like death itself. I didn't have to hit them. I just had to herd them. Truth is, I'd rather mend a fence than a man. I knew exactly where I was pushing them. Toward the east side of the property where the ground sloped down sharply toward the big irrigation pond. The driver, in his terror, made a fatal mistake. He gunned the engine, trying to swing the truck's rear end around. The truck fishtailed wildly in the slick mud. For a moment, it looked like he might get control, but then the back wheels slid off the edge of the graded path. The truck tilted, hung there for a heart-topping second, and then slid slowly at first, then all at once down the muddy embankment and into the pond. It came to rest with a great splash, its nose buried deep in the murky water, and its tail sticking up in the air, its headlights creating 2 ghostly, wavering columns of light beneath the surface. The storm raged on. I stopped the tractor at the edge of the pond and shone my lights on the half-submerged truck. The two men were scrambling out of the passenger side window, soaked and sputtering. They were big guys, much bigger than Jerry, but the fight was completely out of them. They looked terrified. I just sat there in the tractor's cab, high above them, watching. The rain started to lessen, the thunder moving off into the distance. I got out of the tractor and walked to the edge of the water. One of the men was clinging to the side of the truck bed. The other was wading through the waist-deep water toward the bank. As he got closer, I saw something float out of the cab and bob on the surface. Two small, dark rectangles, burner phones. I waded into the cold water without a second thought and snatched them up before they could sink. I held them up. The two goons just stared at me, their faces pale in the tractor's headlights. They knew what I had. More evidence, more proof. The storm was ending, and so was Karen Tyson's desperate plan. I had her thugs. I had their phones, and I had their truck slowly drowning in my pond. The sheriff finally arrived an hour later after the storm had passed and the phone lines were back up. He looked at the scene, the two soaked and shivering men sitting on the ground in handcuffs, the pickup truck sticking out of the pond and me standing there covered in mud, and just shook his head. "Halt," Sheriff Miller said, his voice weary. "I should have known that when dispatch said there was a minor traffic incident at your place, it would look like this." I handed him the two burner phones sealed in a plastic bag. I gave him Jerry's signed confession and a thumb drive with all the video files. Lisa had already printed out the fake HOA minutes and the corporate filings for Oakage Estates, all neatly organized in a binder. We gave him everything. I handed over Jerry's keys and the chain we'd used on the bay door. He took our statements and said, "For now, this is our report. Whether it's criminal mischief or lawful removal depends on your proof," he added. "Don't move that truck or the phones on your own. Chain it. We'll process it." He spent a long time looking through it all, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He looked at the confession, then at the two men in the back of his patrol car. "These two aren't talking," he said, "but I have a feeling these phones will." The next 2 days were quiet, the calm before the final storm. The sheriff's department impounded the pickup from the pond and took our evidence. Lisa and I knew we had done all we could. Now it was a matter of waiting for the legal system to work. But we also knew we had one more card to play. The HOA had a regularly scheduled monthly meeting that Friday night. It was usually a dull affair, attended by a handful of retirees complaining about lawn ornaments. But we knew Karen would be there. She would have to be to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. We decided this was where it had to end. Not in a quiet courtroom months from now, but in public in front of the very people she had lorded her power over. We spent the day making calls, talking to our neighbors. We spoke to neighbor Ed and his wife Sharon. We talked to the woman Karen had fined for planting the wrong color of petunias. We talked to the family she'd threatened over the height of their kid's swing set. We didn't tell them everything, just that we had something important to say at the meeting and that we would appreciate their support. Friday night, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had gotten out. People were standing along the walls. Karen Tyson was at the front of the room looking polished and confident, but I could see a faint tension around her eyes. She clearly wasn't expecting this kind of turnout. She tried to run the meeting as usual, talking about budgets and landscaping contracts, but the air in the room was thick with anticipation. Finally, she got to the new business portion of the agenda. "Does anyone have any new business?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I stood up. "I do," I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. Karen's smile tightened. "Mr. Travis, I'm surprised to see you here. I would think you'd be busy dealing with your various property issues." A few of her cronies on the board chuckled. "I'm here to talk about property issues, Karen," I said, walking toward the front of the room. "Specifically, my property and the easement you've been trying to force through it." Lisa was right behind me. She took out her phone, propped it up on the podium, and pressed a button. "For the record," she said in a clear, loud voice, "this meeting is now being live-reamed." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. She leaned toward a mic she thought was off and hissed, "Delete that feed." The chat exploded. "We heard that. Comments board. Play the blue hands. Run the minutes. That's against the rules," she sputtered. Neighbor Ed stood up from his seat on the board. "Actually, Karen, it's not," he said calmly. "I checked the bylaws. There's nothing prohibiting it. I laid it all out. I started with the blocked driveway and the fake fines. Then I told them about the stolen fuel and the cut fence. I played the video from the birdhouse camera on the projector we brought, showing Jerry with his glowing blue hands. The room was silent, captivated. I read Jerry's signed confession out loud, his words echoing in the stunned silence. I explained how Karen had falsified the HOA minutes to authorize a lawsuit against us. Then Lisa put the final slide up on the screen. It was the corporate filing for Oakage Estates, the developer, and next to it, the wedding announcement from the old newspaper, both bearing the name Karen Miller. The developer who stands to make millions from this easement, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, is a shell company owned and operated by one person, your HOA president, Karen Tyson. The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing at Karen, who looked like a cornered animal. She tried to deny it, to shout over the noise, calling it all lies and slander. But then other people started to stand up. The woman with the petunias spoke, her voice trembling with anger about how Karen had harassed her for months. The man with the swing set stood up and described how Karen had threatened to put a lien on his house. One by one, a dozen people who had been bullied and intimidated by her found their voice. It was a tidal wave of anger, and Karen was drowning in it. She saw it was over. Her power, built on fear and deception, was evaporating before her very eyes. As the chaos reached its peak, just as she was trying to gather her things and flee the podium, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open with a loud bang. The whole room went silent. Standing in the doorway, his face set like granite, was Sheriff Miller. Sheriff Miller wasn't alone. He had 2 deputies with him. They didn't rush in. They just stood there for a moment, letting the silence in the room deepen. Every eye was on them, then on Karen. You could hear the AC hum. My chest felt like a gate strained by wind. She was frozen behind the podium, her face a mask of disbelief and panic. The sheriff took a slow walk to the front of the room, his boots making a heavy, deliberate sound on the tile floor. He held up a thick sheath of papers. "Karen Tyson," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "I have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp went through the crowd, he continued, listing the charges as if reading a grocery list. Conspiracy to commit grand theft, felony vandalism, insurance fraud related to the vehicle you reported damaged in a ditch, and racketeering for using the Briarwood Homeowners Association as a criminal enterprise to defraud its members and enrich yourself. It was that last charge, racketeering, that seemed to finally break her. The blood drained from her face. This wasn't about fines and easements anymore. This was serious prison time. She didn't scream or cry. She did what cowards always do when they are truly cornered. She ran. She shoved past one of her board members, knocking over a pitcher of water, and bolted for the side exit. The deputies moved to intercept her, but she was fast, fueled by pure panic. She burst out into the parking lot. We all rushed to the windows to watch. Her big white SUV, the same one freshly repaired and gleaming under the parking lot lights, was right by the door. She fumbled with her keys, finally got the door open and threw herself inside. The engine roared to life. She slammed the SUV into reverse, peeling out of the parking spot with a squeal of tires, and then threw it into drive. She was aiming for the main exit for the freedom of the open road. But she was panicked, not thinking clearly. A deputy had moved his patrol car to partially block the exit. Karen swerved violently to avoid it. Too violently. Her front tires went off the pavement and onto the manicured, well-watered grass of the clubhouse lawn. The grass was wet, slick as ice. The big SUV lost all traction. It began to slide, a slow, inevitable, almost comical skid. It slid across the lawn, gaining a little speed as it went down the slight incline, heading directly for the road and for the drainage ditch that ran alongside it. Perfect, poetic, inescapable. With a final heavy crunch of metal and plastic, the front end of Karen Tyson's luxury SUV plunged for the second and final time into the exact same ditch I had so gently placed it in weeks before. It came to rest at the exact same angle, nose down in the mud, tail up in the air. The engine sputtered and died. Silence. Then the parking lot was filled with flashing red and blue lights. The deputies didn't have to chase her. They just calmly walked over to the driver's side door, opened it, and helped a dazed and muddy Karen Tyson out of the car and into a pair of handcuffs. The reign of the HOA queen was officially over. She had quite literally driven herself right back into the hole she had dug. In the weeks that followed, the whole rotten scaffold Karen built came apart, board by board. Jerry folded first. He met the prosecutor, hands scrubbed raw like he could wash off the blue. He took a plea and told the truth. The 2 pond divers caved next. Turns out cold water and burner phones don't make good alibis. Those phones were gold. Texts, schedules, payment screenshots. Karen's consulting looked a lot like paying herself with her maiden name and an extra 0. Her lawyer tried the usual tricks. Delay, deny, scowl. The stack of proof kept growing. Birdhouse cams, fake minutes, the shell company trail, even her own emails where she CC'd insurance and hinted her SUV was likely a full loss. When the DA added racketeering, the room went quiet. That word changes air. Her counsel leaned close, spoke low, and a proud face finally cracked. She pled, not out of grace, out of math. The board she ruled like a tiny kingdom gone in a week. Resignations came in acid little flood. Neighbor Ed, steady as a fence post, took interim president and called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. People filled every chair and then the aisles. He read the agenda, cleared his throat, and said the line we all needed. Motioned to void every fine issued under the prior board for the last 2 years. The chorus of "I hit the ceiling." Folks cried. Folks hugged. I just let my shoulders drop and breathed like a man who'd been holding a hay bale above his head for months. The easement died where it stood. Oak Ridge Estates, poof, dissolved in the plea. The outside developer, who had sniffed at my pasture, backed away like a stray dog that finally met a boot. The right-of-way stayed what it had always been. Cattle path, deer track, my land. Nothing fancy, just mine. Life slid back into its groove. Feed, fences, sleep, evenings with Lisa on the porch, counting bats and blessings. The corn went green, then gold, then gone. Trucked out with that sweet dust that coats your teeth and makes you think of next year. Winter put a soft hat on the fields. The quiet came back deeper than before, like the ground itself exhaled. One cold afternoon, I cleaned the barn, sorting bolts by coffee can and stories by weight. A box from the clubhouse sat by the door, full of paper ghosts, old agendas, a crooked trophy for best yard, some pens that never wrote. At the bottom was a bent plate caked in dried ditch. Miss HOA, I laughed out loud. I washed the mud but left the bend. The bend was the truth. I set it on the bench and asked myself the question that kept prowling the edges of my mind. How far is too far? Is it baiting a thief with dye? Chasing a truck with a tractor? Live streaming a lie until it can't breathe? I turned the plate in my hands and saw the answer in the ripples. It's too far when you start the fight. When you covet what isn't yours. When you swing first and call it order. I didn't start this. I finished it. Lisa came in, cheeks pink from the air. You keeping that? She asked. Oh yeah, I said. I took a hammer and one fat nail and walked to the big center beam. The barnwood is older than me, and most of my mistakes. I drove the nail home and hung the plate at eye level where the morning light can find it. It fit there like a knot in the grain. We stood a while. The wind fussed at the door. Somewhere a calf bawled, and a hen bragged about nothing. Lisa slid her hand into mine. What's it say to you? She asked. I smiled. It says we don't start trouble here. I looked toward the drive, clean and quiet. Around here, if you block a driveway, you meet a ditch. I squeezed her hand. And if you try to take what's ours, you meet us. I shut off the lights. The plate shone a little in the last of the sun. A small, crooked moon on old wood. We latched the door. The barn held our tools, our stories, and one loud reminder. On this farm, we mind our business until someone decides to make their business ours. Then we mind it with wits, with proof, and if we must, with 12 tons of green steel.